Bank manager denies black woman a loan. 10 minutes later, she buys the bank. Ava Thompson walked into Grayson Bank with nothing but a dream, a detailed business plan, and the determination to change her community. But when the bank manager, Richard Grayson, dismissively rejected her loan application, she knew it wasn't just about money. It was about the deep-seated biases that had held her back for far too long. What would she do next? How far was she willing to go to fight for what was right? The answer would shock everyone. What happens when a woman decides to take back control in the most unexpected way? Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Ava Thompson stood outside the large, imposing structure of Grayson Bank, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve firm. She had always believed in herself, in her ideas, and in her ability to make a difference. The time had come to make her vision a reality. She had spent the last 6 months crafting a business plan for a startup aimed at empowering black entrepreneurs in her community, providing them with financial education, resources, and opportunities that had long been denied to them. It was a vision she knew could change the landscape of local business for generations. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind as she adjusted the strap of her purse. Never let anyone make you feel small, Ava. Your ideas are worth fighting for. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her mother, an entrepreneur herself, had taught Ava to always stand tall in the face of adversity, to face challenges head-on and rise above them. And today, Ava was ready to do just that. She took a deep breath and entered the bank. The sleek marble floors, the polished wooden counters, and the expensive artwork adorning the walls made her feel like an outsider in a world that wasn't built for someone like her. But Ava was determined. She had worked hard for this moment. She wasn't just another hopeful entrepreneur. She was a force to be reckoned with. Ava approached the front desk where a young woman with a forced smile greeted her. "Good morning. How can I assist you today?" "I have an appointment with Mr. Richard Grayson," Ava said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of excitement. She was about to make the biggest pitch of her life, and she wasn't going to let nerves shake her confidence. The receptionist nodded and gestured toward the elevator. "Third floor, suite 310. Ava nodded in acknowledgement and took the elevator up. She had come prepared. A thick folder filled with financial projections, market research, and a comprehensive business plan that she had spent weeks refining. She was ready for whatever came her way. Richard Grayson was seated behind a large mahogany desk when Ava entered his office. He was a man in his mid-50s, dressed in a sharply tailored suit, with neatly combed salt and pepper hair and a face that conveyed experience, maybe even a little arrogance. Ava knew the type all too well. He was the epitome of old money, entrenched in a system that had long excluded people like her from its benefits. "Ah, you must be Ms. Thompson," Grayson said, looking up at her with a quick, dismissive glance before returning his attention to the papers on his desk. "Please sit." Ava remained standing for a moment, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. She wasn't going to make it easy for him to dismiss her. Finally, she sat across from him, her back straight, her eyes locked on his. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today," Ava began, her voice clear. "I have an exciting proposal for a community-focused startup aimed at addressing the financial needs of underserved entrepreneurs, particularly those in the black community." Grayson's eyes flickered up at her, his disinterest barely concealed. "I see," he said, tapping his fingers on the desk. "And what exactly makes you think your business will succeed where so many others have failed?" Ava took a breath and slid the folder across the desk. "I believe the problem isn't with the people or the ideas, but with the lack of access to capital, mentorship, and resources that have been systematically withheld from certain groups. My startup plans to provide not just loans, but a support network, financial literacy programs, and resources that will help black entrepreneurs thrive." Grayson barely glanced at the documents in front of him. "Interesting," he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. "But let's get to the point. You're asking for a loan, I presume?" "Yes," Ava replied confidently. "I'm seeking a partnership, a loan to start the project, and support in growing the vision into a sustainable business." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. His eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned her business plan, clearly not impressed by the polished details. "This is ambitious. But frankly, Ms. Thompson, your proposal doesn't meet the bank's criteria. We typically invest in established businesses with a proven track record. You're new, and your background doesn't exactly inspire confidence." Ava's pulse quickened, but she remained calm. She had expected this. Grayson's dismissiveness wasn't about the quality of her proposal. It was about something deeper, something ingrained in the system he represented. This was about prejudice, about power. "What exactly is it about my proposal that doesn't meet your criteria?" Ava asked, her tone sharp. Grayson shrugged nonchalantly. "There's no market evidence for such a niche business. There's no guarantee of success. And frankly, there's not much in your history that suggests you can pull this off." Ava's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. "Let me be clear. This is not just a business proposal. It's a movement, a chance to uplift a community that has been underserved and overlooked for too long. If you can't see the potential, then I'm afraid I'm wasting your time." Grayson's smile was cold. "You're right about one thing, Ms. Thompson. This is a waste of my time." He stood up abruptly, signaling the end of the meeting. Ava's mind raced, but she stood up slowly, gathering her papers. As she turned to leave, she made a decision. She wasn't going to walk out of here defeated. She wasn't going to let him win. As Ava stepped out of Grayson's office, she could feel the weight of the injustice bearing down on her. But instead of giving into frustration, something inside her sparked. She would not let this rejection define her or stop her from achieving her dream. She would turn this setback into her greatest triumph. Ava pulled out her phone and dialed the number of her investor, Maya Robinson, a seasoned businesswoman who had been supportive of Ava's vision from the start. "Maya, it's Ava. We're going to take a different route. I need to acquire Grayson Bank." There was a brief pause on the line. Then, Maya's voice came back, full of both surprise and excitement. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Ava said, her voice filled with determination. "It's time to turn the tables. If they won't give me a loan, then I'll own the bank." Later that day, Ava's world changed in an instant. Within hours of her decision, a series of rapid moves and strategic negotiations saw her become the majority shareholder of Grayson Bank. Shock waves rippled through the financial community, but for Ava, it was just the beginning. The power was now in her hands, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. The next day, as she looked out from the window of her new office on the top floor of Grayson Bank, Ava couldn't help but smile. She had always known she was destined for something bigger. Now, it was time to take her vision to the next level. And Richard Grayson? He was about to find out that you should never underestimate a determined woman with a vision for change. Ava stood in the sleek, minimalist office of her new position, gazing out over the city skyline. The building, once a symbol of exclusion and inequality, now felt like hers. It was the first time she could truly feel the weight of her decision to acquire Grayson Bank and the responsibility that came with it. But there was no fear in her, only a burning desire to see her vision realized. She took a deep breath and turned back to the phone in front of her. She had already made the call to her trusted investors, who had been just as surprised as she had been when she first floated the idea. The news of her acquisition was spreading fast, and Ava knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. This wasn't just about financial success. It was about changing a system that had worked for too long against the people she was trying to help. Richard Grayson, on the other hand, was seething in his office. The shock of Ava's acquisition was still fresh, like a bitter taste he couldn't shake. He had spent years building his empire, using the same tired methods that had worked for generations. He dismissed Ava as another idealistic dreamer, but now he had been blindsided. His world was crumbling, and it was all because of one woman. As he stared at his desk, the ringing of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts. It was the board of directors. "Grayson, this is a mess." The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. "You need to fix this, or we'll be forced to act." "I'll handle it," Grayson muttered, his grip tightening on the receiver. He didn't know how yet, but he would regain control. He always did. Meanwhile, Ava's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Maya. It read, "You did it. But what's next? What's your plan?" Ava's fingers hovered over the screen before typing a quick reply. We start by changing everything, and we do it transparently. It was a simple response, but Ava knew that it had to be more than just a symbolic victory. She wasn't interested in playing the same power games as Grayson and the old guard. Ava's acquisition wasn't a mere corporate takeover. It was a revolution. She needed to start with a clean slate. A full audit of the bank's operations would uncover everything. She wasn't just going to bring new leadership. She was going to expose the rot that had been festering for years. The following week, Ava called for a meeting with the senior staff and the entire bank's board of directors. As they shuffled into the grand, corporate boardroom, there was an air of unease. No one knew what to expect from their new boss. Ava, however, knew exactly what she wanted to say. When the room settled, she stood up, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Good morning, everyone," she began. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made the room hang on every word. "I'm sure you're all wondering why I'm here and what this means for the future of Grayson Bank. The truth is, this is a turning point, not just for this institution, but for the community we serve." She paused, scanning the room. Some faces were skeptical, others fearful. Richard Grayson's empty seat was a glaring reminder of the old regime's collapse. A lot has been said about what this bank represents, about who it serves and who it excludes. But the time for exclusion is over, Ava continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We will now operate with transparency, with integrity, and with a commitment to fairness. No one will be left behind." The murmurs around the table began to grow louder. Ava could feel the resistance, the hesitation. This was not going to be easy, but she had already made up her mind. "I know there are many of you who are loyal to the old system," she said, "but that system has hurt too many people for too long. You will either adapt to the new way we're doing things, or you will leave. It's that simple." She paused again, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "And as for Mr. Grayson," she added, "I expect his resignation letter on my desk by the end of the day." The meeting lasted for hours, and by the time it was over, Ava had made her intentions clear. The transformation of Grayson Bank would not happen overnight, but it was already starting. Ava didn't care about making friends in the old guard. She cared about building a future where people like her, and people like the communities she aimed to uplift, had access to the tools they needed to thrive. As Ava left the boardroom, she caught sight of one of the junior employees, Lana, a young woman who had worked at the bank for a few years. Her eyes met Ava's, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of hope in them. "You're doing the right thing," Lana said quietly. Ava smiled, though she knew the real work was just beginning. Later that evening, Ava sat down at her desk and took a deep breath. It was the first time in her life that she felt the true weight of leadership, not just in the sense of being in charge, but in knowing that every decision she made had the potential to change lives. The next day, she called a meeting with her team of trusted advisors, Maya included. It was time to begin the audit. "I want a complete review of every financial transaction, every loan application, and every internal practice," Ava instructed. "If there is any hint of corruption or unethical behavior, I want it exposed. No one is above accountability." As her team got to work, Ava reflected on the journey that had led her here. She wasn't just trying to turn a profit. She was trying to rebuild a broken system from the inside out. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, pushback, and threats. But Ava wasn't afraid of the fight. In fact, she welcomed it. Meanwhile, at Grayson Bank, Richard Grayson spent sleepless nights plotting his next move. His reputation was on the line, and he couldn't afford to be outmaneuvered by a woman like Ava Thompson. He would fight back, he had to. But as he watched the press coverage of Ava's takeover, he couldn't shake the feeling that something larger than business was at play. This wasn't just a takeover. This was a revolution, and Ava Thompson wasn't going to stop until she had taken everything from him. But in his gut, he knew something else too. This woman, this force, might just change everything in ways he couldn't even comprehend. Ava sat at the head of the sleek, glass conference table in the high-rise boardroom of what had once been Grayson Bank. The room, bathed in natural light, was now her domain, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal space it had been under the old regime. She glanced out the window at the city stretching below. So many lives, so many stories, all bound together by a financial system that had often left them behind. The transformation she had started wasn't just about new leadership. It was about overhauling everything the bank represented. It was about giving people the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their race, gender, or background. She wasn't here to simply manage the status quo. She was here to build a bank for the people who had never been given a real chance. Ava turned to her team of advisors, her inner circle of investors, and trusted colleagues who had supported her from the very beginning. "Today is a turning point," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "We're not just changing policies. We're changing the culture of this institution. I know many of you have heard the rumors, the whispers about how hard this will be. But we've already proven that change is possible. Grayson Bank has already been shaken to its core, and it's time to rebuild." She paused, watching the faces around the table. They were a mix of excited and nervous, just as she had been when she made her first move to acquire the bank. "We've started with the audit," she continued. "But there's more to do. It's time to meet with the staff, to make it clear what our vision is and what we won't tolerate." Maya Robinson, one of Ava's investors, nodded in agreement. "It's a good plan, but the resistance within the bank is deep. There will be employees, long-timers who've been loyal to Grayson, who won't accept this shift." Ava's eyes hardened, the spark of resolve in her gaze sharpening. "I know, but we can't let that stop us. If they're not on board with a fair, transparent, and inclusive environment, they can leave. We don't have time to babysit anyone who's still clinging to the old ways." The following day, Ava called a meeting with the entire staff, the first of many she planned to hold to make the future of the bank crystal clear. She stood before them in the same boardroom where Grayson had once held court, a room that now seemed to buzz with tension. Ava could sense the eyes of the employees, some curious, some anxious, some downright hostile. "Thank you all for coming," Ava began, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs in the room. "I'm sure many of you are wondering what the future holds, especially after recent events." There were a few murmurs of agreement, and she could see the skepticism on many faces. The previous leadership had conditioned them to believe that change was dangerous, that the bank's rigid structure was the only way to survive in a competitive world. But Ava wasn't here to cater to their fears. She was here to challenge them. "I want to be clear," Ava continued. "This is not a temporary shift. This is not just a passing phase. We're going to change the way this bank operates, from top to bottom. We're going to rebuild this institution into one that not only serves the wealthy, but serves the underserved, the community we've ignored for far too long." Some of the employees exchanged uneasy glances. Ava's words were radical to them, challenging everything they had known. "But I also want you to understand this," she said, leaning forward slightly. "If you don't believe in our mission, if you're not willing to put in the work to make this a reality, then you will not have a place here." The room fell silent. Ava's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of some of the senior staff who had worked under Grayson's leadership. She could see the resentment in their eyes. They had been loyal to Grayson, the man who had made them feel safe in their roles, comfortable in their positions of power. Ava's voice softened, but there was still an underlying firmness to her words. "I'm not asking for blind loyalty. I'm asking for honesty and a commitment to making things right. That means we need to hold ourselves and each other accountable. If we're going to succeed, we need everyone on board, every department, every manager, and every one of you who chooses to stay." She let that sink in before adding, "And if you think we can't succeed, if you think this is impossible, you have every right to walk out that door. But know this. The ones who stay will help me build something that will change this city. And we will prove everyone wrong." A tense silence hung in the room before someone from the back spoke up. "What makes you think this will work?" It was a young man, someone Ava didn't recognize. He stood up, a look of defiance on his face. "People like us, we don't get to run things. People like you, you're not going to change how the system works. You can't just walk in here and expect everything to suddenly turn around." Ava's eyes locked onto his. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward slightly, her presence commanding attention. "Change is hard," she said, her voice measured but intense. "But change is the only way forward. And people like me, people who have been told time and time again that they're not enough, are the ones who will change the system. I don't have all the answers, but I'm damn sure going to find them. And I'm asking you, if you're willing to fight for something better, then join me. For a moment, the room was still. The young man's defiance wavered, and a few others exchanged glances. Ava could feel the tension easing just a little. Some were beginning to see that this wasn't just a fight for the bank. It was a fight for something bigger. That afternoon, as Ava walked through the lobby of the bank, she was approached by Lana, the young woman who had spoken to her the day before. Lana had worked at Grayson Bank for almost 4 years, and though she wasn't in a managerial role, she had seen the inner workings of the place. She had witnessed the subtle racism, the favoritism, and the systemic issues that had kept people like her from ever getting ahead. "I meant what I said," Lana said, her voice quiet but earnest. "I want to help. I think what you're doing is right." Ava smiled warmly. "Thank you, Lana. I appreciate that. We're going to need all the help we can get." Lana's eyes gleamed with a spark of hope. "I think this is the first time I've actually felt like there's a chance for real change. For people like me, people who've been stuck for too long." Ava placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling a rare sense of connection. This was why she had fought so hard. This was what kept her moving forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. That evening, Ava sat in her office, looking over the first set of reports from the internal audit. The numbers didn't lie. There were massive discrepancies in the bank's operations, hidden fees, discriminatory lending practices, and unethical conduct that had been brushed under the rug for years. She had expected this, but seeing it in black and white was still a blow. But Ava didn't hesitate. She knew what had to be done. The next day, she began her first wave of action. She called in the managers involved in the misconduct and gave them one simple ultimatum: resign or face termination. No more excuses, no more hiding. The bank had to operate with transparency, and that started at the top. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Ava. Every day, she was on the move, navigating the complexities of her new role while relentlessly pursuing her vision for a more inclusive, transparent banking system. The internal audit was progressing, but Ava knew it wasn't enough to simply identify the problems. She needed to act quickly and decisively. She needed to create a clean break with the past, severing all ties to the unethical practices that had been allowed to thrive under Richard Grayson's leadership. She spent long hours with her team, combing through records and speaking with employees at every level of the bank. As expected, they uncovered discrepancies, grants denied to minority-owned businesses, subprime loans with sky-high interest rates targeting vulnerable communities, and an entire division that had been dedicated to keeping Black and Latino clients at arm's length. It was all systematic, a product of a culture that saw profit as the only measure of success and human lives as mere numbers in a spreadsheet. But what shocked Ava the most wasn't just the scale of the corruption. It was the complicity that ran through every level of the bank. Mid-level managers, once trusted by their staff, had taken part in these practices willingly. They had justified their actions by citing company policy or simply by looking the other way. As the audit unfolded, Ava's resolve only strengthened. This was exactly what she had expected, and exactly why she needed to act swiftly. She had always known that real change would require more than just firing a few bad apples. The entire system needed to be overhauled, and that meant making tough decisions. It meant holding people accountable, no matter how high up they were in the company. Ava called a meeting with her senior advisors that afternoon. The walls of her office, once sterile and cold, now felt like a sanctuary of action, filled with the energy of a revolution in the making. "Maya, I need you to prepare a list of employees who are involved in the systemic failures we've uncovered," Ava said, her voice steady but firm. "I want them out, immediately. There's no room for tolerance here." Maya nodded, already pulling up the documents on her laptop. "I've already started. But Ava, you have to be prepared for the fallout. These are key players in the bank. Firing them could cause chaos. Employees will feel uncertain, even more resistant." Ava clenched her jaw, but didn't hesitate. "I've seen what happens when people are allowed to slide by. It doesn't just harm the victims. It poisons the entire system. We can't have that. We have to show the bank and the community that we mean business." It wasn't long before Ava's actions set off a chain reaction. Employees started to whisper in the halls, murmurs of discontent echoing through the building. Some were worried about their own positions. Others were furious at the idea of a new leadership that threatened the status quo. For many, it was easier to remain loyal to the old ways, to ignore the corruption because it was profitable. But now, that excuse was no longer valid. Ava sat at her desk that evening, going through the details of each termination. It wasn't easy. These were people's livelihoods, but Ava knew that these actions were necessary for the greater good. The hardest part, she realized, was knowing that some of those let go would try to retaliate. She had already received threats, veiled messages warning her to back off. But Ava wasn't afraid. She had come too far to let fear dictate her decisions. The next morning, Ava called Richard Grayson in for a meeting. She had avoided him up until now, allowing his resignation to be a foregone conclusion, but it was time for the final confrontation. He had made it clear that he wouldn't go down without a fight, and Ava knew that he was the type of man who would try to rally his supporters. Grayson entered her office with the same smug expression that had infuriated Ava during their first encounter. But now, it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a mask hiding his fear. His empire was crumbling, and he knew it. His once vibrant career had been built on power and control, but Ava had taken that from him with one bold move. "You've really done it now, haven't you?" Grayson sneered as he sat down across from her. "This is nothing but a power grab. You're playing a dangerous game, and you have no idea what you're up against." Ava's gaze was unflinching. "You're right about one thing. I've done it. And I'm not playing a game. I'm rebuilding this bank, and I'm making sure that those who have been harmed by your actions have the chance they deserve." Grayson's expression darkened. "You'll regret this, Thompson. The people you've pissed off, those who have money, influence, they won't stand for it. You can't just throw away years of tradition." "Tradition built on greed and exclusion," Ava shot back. "That tradition is dead now, Grayson. And as for your future, consider this your official notice. I'm terminating your position as of today." Grayson's face turned red with fury. "You think you've won? You think the board will back you? They'll be on my side. You're nothing but a pawn, Ava. You'll never be able to hold on to this bank." Ava stood up, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "I'm not a pawn, Richard. I'm the future, and you're just the past. I suggest you start preparing for your next chapter." Grayson stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "You haven't heard the last of me," he snarled before storming out of the office. For Ava, it was a victory, an important moment that signaled the end of the old order. But she knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. Grayson would fight back, as would the people who had been complicit in the corruption. There would be more resistance, more challenges ahead. But with each passing day, she felt more confident in the path she was carving. She wasn't just taking control of a bank. She was reshaping the future of an entire community. Later that day, Ava addressed the staff again, this time in a more personal tone. She wanted to reassure them, to make it clear that her vision was not just about cleaning house. It was about building something better. "I know these changes are difficult, but they're necessary," Ava began. "I want to make one thing crystal clear. This bank belongs to the community. It's not about power or profit anymore. It's about fairness, inclusion, and opportunity for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from." She paused, looking out over the room. Some faces still looked skeptical, but she could see others beginning to soften. It wasn't going to be an easy road, but Ava was determined to stay the course. "We are in this together," she continued, "and I promise you, we'll build something that we can all be proud of." Ava had always known that true change wasn't just about reforming an institution. It was about reconnecting with the very community that had been betrayed by the bank's previous leadership. The people who had been denied loans, the small businesses that had never stood a chance, the families who had been held back by predatory practices, all of them needed more than just a financial institution. They needed a partner, someone who saw their struggles, their potential, and their dreams. And so, with that understanding, Ava set out to build trust. She wasn't going to ask for it. She was going to earn it. That meant more than just changing policies. It meant engaging directly with the people she hoped to serve and creating programs that would make a tangible difference. The first initiative she launched was the mentorship program, an idea that had been simmering in her mind for weeks. She knew that the local entrepreneurs, particularly those from marginalized communities, had incredible ideas but lacked the resources, support, and guidance to bring them to fruition. And so, Ava partnered with several successful local business owners, many of whom had struggled with the same barriers she had faced, to offer mentorship to up-and-coming entrepreneurs. The program was simple, yet powerful. Local business owners would volunteer their time to mentor young entrepreneurs, offering advice, resources, and, most importantly, a connection to the bank's financial services, ones that were now accessible to all, regardless of their background. The response to the mentorship program was overwhelming. Within weeks of its launch, the bank had seen a surge in applications, both from entrepreneurs seeking guidance and from experienced mentors eager to make a difference. Ava's office was filled with energy as she and her team worked to coordinate the workshops, one-on-one sessions, and community events that would support these new partnerships. But Ava knew the real work was in shifting the cultural mindset of the bank itself. As much as she had changed the leadership at the top, the staff needed to be on the same page. If they didn't truly understand the mission, all the outreach and programming in the world wouldn't mean a thing. One morning, she walked into the bank's training room, where a group of staff members had gathered for a meeting. Most of them were new hires, having come on after the change in leadership, but there were also a few holdovers from Grayson's regime. Ava recognized some of the skeptical faces that had lingered during her initial staff meeting. She knew they had their doubts about her, about the bank's future, and about her ability to bring real, lasting change. I know many of you are still trying to figure out where you fit in this new vision for the bank. Ava began, her voice calm but confident. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly, but I am asking you to believe in the mission. This bank isn't just a place where people store their money. This is a place where we give people the opportunity to build something for themselves, to lift their families, to grow their businesses. We are here to be partners in their success, not gatekeepers of it. There were a few nods in the room, but Ava could tell that some were still hesitant. She needed to show them, not just tell them. Let me give you an example, Ava continued. This week, we had a young woman, Maria, come in to apply for a loan to open a bakery. Maria's parents fled a war-torn country, and they've worked their whole lives to give her the chance to follow her dreams. She's a brilliant baker, but without a loan from us, she would never have the resources to open her own shop. Do you know how many businesses like hers have been denied by other banks just because of her background? Just because of the color of her skin? Well, we're going to give Maria that loan, and we're going to make sure she has all the support she needs to succeed. The room was quiet for a moment, and then, slowly, a few people nodded. Ava could see the shift in their expressions. This wasn't about charity. This was about opportunity. It was about leveling the playing field for everyone, no matter their race, their income, or their zip code. Ava's next step was to take her vision directly to the community. She had long understood that a bank was only as strong as the people it served. If the community didn't trust the institution, it would never succeed. But trust couldn't be built from behind a desk. It needed to be cultivated through genuine connection and transparency. And so, she scheduled a town hall meeting, inviting local leaders, business owners, and residents to meet her face-to-face and hear about the changes underway at Grayson Bank. It was a bold move. Ava knew that people would be skeptical, perhaps even hostile, but she had never been one to shy away from difficult conversations. The town hall was held in the community center, a modest building that had hosted more than its fair share of meetings over the years. Ava stood at the front, behind a simple podium, facing a sea of faces, many of which were hardened by years of broken promises and disappointment. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion. Ava began slowly, giving everyone a chance to settle into their seats. She knew that if she was going to convince these people that the bank had truly changed, she needed to be vulnerable, honest, and open. I know some of you are here today because you've been hurt by banks like this one. Ava began, her voice steady but tinged with empathy. I know you've been told that you don't matter, that your dreams don't count, that you can't get the support you need to succeed. And I know many of you are probably wondering, why should you trust me? There was a murmur of agreement, and Ava paused for a moment, giving them space. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. She had to prove herself, piece by piece. I don't have all the answers, Ava continued, but I can promise you this. I will fight for this community. I will fight for you. This bank is no longer about keeping people out. It's about lifting people up. We're going to invest in small businesses. We're going to make sure that young people in this neighborhood have the chance to succeed, just like anyone else. And we're going to make sure that this institution works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. A few people in the back shifted in their seats, and Ava could feel the weight of their doubt. But she wasn't finished. She had one more thing to say. And this isn't just about words. It's about action. We're going to launch a series of workshops, business skills, financial literacy, everything you need to make your dreams a reality. And we're going to partner with local organizations to make sure every one of you has the resources you need to succeed. The room was silent for a moment. Then, as if on cue, a woman in the back stood up. She was older, with salt and pepper hair, and her expression was skeptical but intrigued. "Will you give us a chance to show you what we can do?" she asked, her voice tentative but hopeful. Ava smiled. "I'm not just giving you a chance. I'm giving you a partner." By the time the meeting ended, Ava had begun to see the first signs of a shift. The community, once wary and uncertain, was starting to believe. They could feel the sincerity in her words, the commitment behind every decision she made. And as the evening wore on, Ava had already begun to think about what came next. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but Ava was certain of one thing. She was on the right path. And with the support of the community, she would see it through. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Ava was no longer just the owner of a bank. She was becoming a symbol of hope and change for the community. As the mentorship programs flourished and more local entrepreneurs accessed the bank's services, the stories began to pour in. Businesses were opening where once there was only the despair of closed storefronts. Families were getting loans, not just to buy homes, but to send their children to college, to start new ventures, and to secure their futures. Ava knew that each loan granted, each program launched, each success story was proof that her vision was working. But not everyone was pleased. Despite the growing success, there were still those who viewed Ava's efforts with suspicion. Resistance didn't just come from the old guard at the bank. It came from parts of the community that had become so accustomed to a system that worked for the wealthy few that they were unwilling to let go of the old ways. There were whispers, some even from within her own staff, that Ava's methods were too radical, that she was taking too many risks. Ava had expected this. Change, after all, was never easy, especially when it threatened to upend the status quo. But she had never been one to shy away from a challenge. She knew that the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, and she was determined to face them head-on. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ava sat in her office, gazing out the window at the city below. The skyline was dotted with the lights of buildings, their windows glowing in the dusk. In the distance, she could see the bank's logo, bright and bold against the night sky, a symbol of everything she had fought for. Her phone buzzed, breaking her from her thoughts. It was a text from Maya, her trusted advisor. "We've got a situation. The board wants to meet tomorrow morning." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had known that some members of the board were not fully on board with her direction. There had been subtle hints of discontent, a few snide remarks at previous meetings, but nothing overt. Until now. She quickly composed a reply. "I'll be there. Prepare the files on the recent program successes, the feedback from clients, and the financials. We need to show them the proof." The next morning, Ava arrived at the boardroom, her expression calm, but her mind racing. As she entered, she saw several familiar faces, board members who had been with the bank for years, some of whom had been supporters of Grayson's old regime. They sat in a semicircle around the table, their faces inscrutable. At the head of the table sat Richard Grayson. Though he was no longer the bank's CEO, his influence still lingered, like the shadow of a fading storm. Ava had been prepared for this. Grayson was a man who never liked to lose, and now, with the bank under her control, he would do whatever he could to undermine her. "Good morning, everyone," Ava began, her voice steady. I've called this meeting to discuss the direction we are taking with the bank and to provide you with an update on the initiatives we've been working on. Grayson's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. I hope you'll be brief. Ava, we're all very busy. Let's get to the point. Ava ignored his tone and began her presentation, highlighting the bank's recent successes. She detailed the growth of the mentorship program, the increase in small business loans, and the positive feedback from the community. The numbers were undeniable. The bank was doing better than it had in years, and the local economy was showing signs of life it hadn't seen in decades. I'm proud of what we've accomplished so far, Ava concluded. But this is just the beginning. The work we're doing here isn't just about financial growth. It's about changing the lives of the people in our community. It's about creating a fairer, more inclusive banking system. And that's a vision I'm committed to realizing. She paused, letting her words sink in. Some of the board members nodded in approval, while others remained silent, their faces unreadable. But it was Grayson who spoke up next, his voice laced with contempt. Let's not get carried away, Ava. Sure, you've had some success with your little programs, but let's not forget that running a bank is about more than just goodwill. You're putting us at risk with these untested ventures. You're alienating the clients who made this bank what it was. Ava didn't flinch. With all due respect, Richard, the clients you speak of, the ones who were the foundation of this bank, are the very ones who have been neglected and taken advantage of. It's time for a new approach. And I'm confident that, over time, the results will speak for themselves. Grayson's face reddened, but before he could retort, another board member, Eleanor Watts, spoke up. She was an older woman, a longtime supporter of the bank's more traditional methods, but she had slowly begun to warm to Ava's ideas. Actually, Richard, I've been reviewing the numbers. The bank's financials are improving. The mentorship program is growing. I've spoken with several local business owners who've told me how Ava's initiatives are changing their lives. Eleanor turned to Ava. I think you're onto something here. Maybe it's time we start listening to what the community is saying. There was a brief silence in the room. Ava knew this was the moment. She had earned Eleanor's support, and that could be the turning point she needed to solidify her position on the board. In the weeks that followed, Ava's position within the bank grew more secure. The community continued to rally behind her, and the positive results from the mentorship program and small business loans began to trickle in. The bank was no longer just a financial institution. It had become a beacon of change, a symbol of what could be achieved when people were given the tools and the opportunities to succeed. But Ava knew there was still more work to be done. There would always be challenges. Those who resisted change, those who preferred the old ways, and those who saw her as a threat to their power. But Ava was undeterred. She had proven that the system could be changed. She had shown that a vision for a more inclusive, transparent banking system was not just possible, it was necessary. Ava sat in her office late one evening, the city lights twinkling below her. She thought about the journey she had been on, the struggle, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights. She thought about the people whose lives had been changed because of the work they had done together. It was all coming together, piece by piece. For Ava, this wasn't just about success in business. It was about making sure that the future she was building was one where everyone had a chance. She smiled, knowing that the work was far from over, but also knowing that she was exactly where she needed to be.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.